Hey guys, welcome to another episode of R-Rated Christianity. For those joining us for the first time, welcome. This is an apologetics podcast. It comes from the Greek word apologia, to give an answer or defense for why we believe Christianity is logically consistent and doesn't violate the law of non-contradiction, and ultimately why you can trust that library of books called the Bible, those 66 books, and that is predicated around the life of Jesus. It's preparing us to receive Jesus, then getting Jesus, and what he tells us and what promises he makes to us, and what we can expect when we say yes to him. And it has an eternal effect on our lives, but it has a real practical effect on our lives too, on this side of heaven. And so we just like to answer questions. We should be able to answer questions. The Christ followers should be able to give a reason. 1 Peter 3:15, 2 Timothy 2:15, give a reason why, or an answer why we have the hope we have within us. We do it with gentleness and respect, not weakness. And we have to be able to go back and forth and answer questions, not only just for ourselves, but for how do you fish for men and women in Matthew 28:19, to go to all nations, making disciples, teaching them to obey when you don't even know what the hell you believe in the first place. So that's kind of the genesis of why we started this podcast. But for those that watch us on a regular basis, thank you. We really appreciate your support and you watching. Hope you benefit from these conversations as much as we do. We like to talk about current events, theological issues, political issues, non-political issues, societal issues, whatever. Everything's on the table. And one of the, I guess, a major topic, we've addressed this before. I think it's a major issue in our society, but especially in Christian circles and outside of Christian, it's truth. I mean, it's one of God's main characters. I mean, God is love, but he's also true. We always say there's certain things God can't do, and there are certain things he can't do. He cannot murder, he cannot lie, and he cannot be unjust. Everything God does is just. Everything he says is truth. And if he decides to remove someone from this earth, he can kill, but he can never murder, because that would be the spilling of innocent blood, and would be contradictory to his own character in Proverbs 6:16. And then he wouldn't be God if he's contradicting himself. So that being said, truth is a central issue in the Christian ideology, Christian worldview, but it's also it's become a very central issue in our society for some time now. We talk about postmodernism and truth and relative truth, and I think we don't talk in those terms as much lately as we had 6, 7, 8 years ago. But we're seeing that. I mean, I think in society, when you have men competing against women and trans this, trans that, whatever, and then I identify this way, I identify that way. I mean, that's a truth claim. I am this. I'm a woman, or I'm a man. If you're not, I'm just giving an example. I'm not saying we're going to talk about that specifically tonight, but truth matters. And so we've talked about this before. We are in a post-truth society, postmodernist. I mean, then there's a history. This is nothing new. Where you live you do you live your truth. I'll live my truth. You speak your truth. I mean, you have Oprah and all these dumbasses out there saying that. Speak your truth, which essentially translates to give me your opinion. Because, I mean, truth is truth, and it should be objective. And that's, I guess, what we're going to talk about a little bit tonight, and how that relates to the Christian ideology. How does the Christian ideology influence the world, and that interplay? So,
yeah. I mean,
not a small topic.
And this is, this has been a gradual movement in this direction, where truth becomes kind of a function of what people feel. The new term today, politically and socially, is this concept of lived experiences that somehow qualifies as the basis for interpreting reality. And in essence, politically speaking, developing policy based on lived experiences, and then imposing that policy on others. That gets really, really scary, because, I don't know about you, but my experiences have lied to me. And my experiences aren't just what happens to me, but it's also in how I interpret them. And how I interpret my experiences can have a lot to do with things other than the actual experience. So that's kind of dangerous when you start imposing that on people. And that concept, I think, has found its way into government policy. And I think it's hurtful to people. And it's a departure from what the Bible says about what is true. And you brought up this idea of objective reality. We should talk about that, because truth is a thing, and it's a fixed thing, and it's a proper way to look at truth, Nico, is is not to sort of reduce it to perspective. That gets very dangerous with 9 billion people on the earth, none of which can even agree on what their favorite food is, much less on what is true. That's pretty dangerous. So we should go back to see how would you even find truth?
Well, let's do that now. We should
start there and talk about it.
Well, I mean, it matters to us. Jesus says in John 14:6 that he is the way, the truth, and the life. No one gets to the Father but through me. So that's an exclusive. So I think one thing you can say, I mean, we'll just start and let's just talk it through. I think one thing you can say, a characteristic of truth is it's exclusive. And we've talked about the acronym of TRUE and who came up with that acronym? Was it?
Norm Geisler.
Geisler, I was going to say, Moreland Geisler. And the TRUE, transcendent. Obviously, the atheist would not agree with the transcendent part. For the Christian, truth is transcendent, real, universal, and exclusive, right? That's what TRUE stands for, that Professor Geisler said. But I think everyone should agree before this fairly recent times that truth is exclusive. I mean, and it's objective, right, versus subjective. I think we need to talk about objective versus subjective truth, and then get to a definition of truth. Because what is your working definition of truth? Do you have one, other than explaining characteristics of it?
Yeah, I think I got to go back to what I think is kind of the most dominant view of truth. There are theories of truth out there. And there's the postmodern view of truth, which we'll get to in a second, which is really the fancy term for subjective reality. And then there's the post-truth view of truth, which says that there's actually no truth at all. Which is
a truth claim.
Of course it is. Right. Yeah, and we'll get to the issue really at the heart of what you just brought up, which is that it's inconsistent. It's a logically inconsistent position to take, whereas truth, by definition, cannot be logically inconsistent. It can't be rationally inconsistent. But how would I define it? Well, I define it within the context of common sense and what we call the correspondence view of truth. The idea that there are two properties to truth, or two fundamental elements of truth, and that is that truth has a nature. There's something about truth that we can say is fundamental to reality. So when I make a statement, how do you know if my statement is true? You know if my statement is true because the claims that I'm making have either a tie or a disconnection from what is out in the world. And so you make a connection between what I'm saying, between what you see in the world. So truth is mind independent, regardless of how I feel about it, regardless of how passionate I am about it. If what I'm saying doesn't connect to the world out there, then you weigh my statements not as truthful, but as questionable. So that's the first element. Does it correspond? Does it tie? Does it correspond to this mind-independent reality? I think that's where you got to start. And then I think that you need to get back to and say, okay, then is it defensible? Is it inconsistent in some way? Am I making a particular statement, and is that statement defensible through patterns of evidence? And that pattern of evidence can be empirical, where it's data driven, or it's just logical. Does it make logical sense? Is it personally engaging? Is it subjectively engaging? Can you connect to it in some way? Point to your own experience and say, can you connect to it? So truth has properties, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And it's lodged in statements. We're talking right now, I'm making statements, I'm making claims, and people are listening to me and they're saying, yeah, what Araujo is saying makes sense. I can relate to that. I've seen it. It's not just what he thinks, it's actually what is going on out there. And then there's the nature of defensibility. Is it defensible not just in what's out there, but is it defensible logically, or rationally, or is it not cogent? Is it incoherent? So those are properties, and I think we have to come back to that. And when you come back to Jesus and the claims that he made about something, how do we measure Jesus's claims about reality? How do you know what Jesus was saying was true? When you are reading the Gospels, they're biographies, so they're personal histories. So they're making statements about Jesus's life in the context of history. So that's why it's called historical Christianity. We make those, we see the statements that are made, and then we tie them to historical reality, and we find out if there's alignment or not. Because that's one biography, but there's tons of biographies out there that are unchristian from the same time frame. So those statements that are made there, do they correspond with other statements? So historical Christianity. The book of Luke, for instance, opens with a ton of statements about objective reality. Jesus made claims, and we went out to investigate whether those claims were true or not, whether things happened as God said or whether he said. The book of Acts starts the exact same way. It's a historical narrative. And so those are historical elements. But then there's also spiritual and there's also moral arguments. And that's when people have to kind of say, okay, does that make sense? You know, things about sexuality, things about the sanctity of life, things about marriage, truth claims. You know, does it correspond to what we know to be functional and true and constructive?
So who said this? Because I can't think of his name. We talked about it earlier, and he was defending the apologetics of the Christian worldview. He's defending the Christian worldview. And he talked about logical consistency, empirical adequacy, and experiential relevance, right? So, and that can translate to truth, right? I mean, truth needs to be logically consistent. It needs to be backed up by evidence, empirically adequate, and then experientially relevant, meaning it needs to be practically applied in your life. And then that's your correspondence theory, right? Which you're claiming corresponds to what we see. There's evidence of it. So there's empirical data, and then there's a practical aspect to it. So I love that as kind of a working knowledge of how you know something is true. Logically consistent. Something cannot be A and non-A at the same time. Empirically adequate. Well, a bird can fly. We can see that it flies. And is it experientially relevant? Well, I don't give a crap if a bird can fly or not. But I'm just giving an example. But it's got to apply to your life. That's how Christianity is viewed, at least. But truth is the same way. 1 + 1 is 2 for everybody in every language. It's not 2.1. It's not 1.9. It's 2. Now, we know that there's nut jobs out there that try to even distort that. But that's when you get into a logical consistency. And then you get into a definitions argument with them. Well, somebody thinks it's good. Someone thinks, there's people that think that mathematics is racist. That's just stupid as shit. There's no other way to say that. But there's people making that claim. That's not logically consistent, and there's no empirical data to back that up. And experientially relevant, how is that relevant to our lives other than they're making the claim that people of color, brown or black, are not as smart as someone else, and then they're going down that bunny trail, and it's really a racist statement in itself. The claim.
Well, mathematical claims are rarely direct. They're logical in nature. Mathematics is a logical.
But do you see where the people are trying to take that away?
They are. But I'm going to go back to what you said. It's important. It's a foundational premise here. And let's go back and just kind of, pull the layers back. This idea that how do you define truth? Well, you got to talk about it in terms of its components. That's why I said I was trying to think as I was talking, how do you distill down this down to two components? And then the first thing is, what is the nature? Really, you got to start there. What's the nature of what's true? How do you know if something is false or true or not? So you have to come back to this idea that the truth has a nature to it. And this gets back into a discipline. And yeah, there's philosophical discipline called metaphysics, which is the study of being, the study of reality. How do you know something's real or not? How do you do that? And then the second component of truth is not just that it has a nature, that it has a property that's real versus property that is the opposite, which is false. But it has to be rationally tested. You got to find a way. It's got to be tested in some way. And if it's a scientific claim, there are tools to test that empirically. And if it's a logical claim, there are tools to test that as well. There's logical exercises that you can do. In other words, it's got to be meaningful. If something isn't meaningful, that's a property of truth. It has to be meaningful. If you say something and it's incoherent, then it's neither true nor false, and it won't advance your claim. So that's an attribute. It's got to be meaningful. It's got to be getting back to logical consistency. If it's a scientific claim, or if it's a societal claim, then it has to have an objective property. It's outside of myself that you and I can kind of both look at, regardless of how you feel about it and I feel about it. We can honestly say, yeah, that's actually happening. So that's how you got to come back to those properties. And I think that's why Christ was so effective, is because when he talked in parables, when he did that, when he gave people stories to illustrate important theological concepts about the nature and character of God, people could listen to those stories and say, yeah, I can relate to that. He's applying properties to what he's saying. This is important. Statements make claims, and those claims have what's called truth maker properties. You're listening to me and you're saying, yeah, I'm applying weight or a lack of weight to what you're saying. How are you doing that? You're doing that because you live in the same world I do. And I think that attachment is important. And that's why I think Jesus was effective, is because he was very good at attaching claims to what people knew fundamentally to be inarguable. And this gets back to the apologist. A good apologist, a good defender of the Christian worldview is good at making those kinds of correlations between what the Bible claims to be true and what we witness out there in the world. And the war right now, Nico, is that we have a really sort of this secular religion that says we don't give a shit about what you see in the world. It's all how you feel about it. That's the point. Perspective wins the day in everything, regardless of whether something is obviously or objectively true or not. And this is a legitimate question for the Christian. How do you do that? How do you mount a case for the truth of Christianity when the very definition of truth isn't agreed upon? That's our challenge today. So
what is the postmodernist? What's their definition of truth?
Well, the postmodernist says that truth can't be known
At all?
Right.
No truth can be known.
That's correct.
So the truth statement that fire on your skin will burn you, that can't be known?
Right.
No, well, I mean, that's a serious question, because that's a stupid ass.
I'm not saying there's credence to it, but you're right.
How do they defend something like that? How do they?
What they're saying is that language is not adequate to convey meaning, because language is a social construction. And language is filled with words that have particular definitions. If you want to redefine them in a particular way, then your reality is going to follow a different path than my reality might, because I might define it in a different way. I mean, when you step back and you say, oh my goodness, the world will collapse in a system like that. If you can't, because what's the basis for finding common ground? The whole view is rather foolish. And it's logically inconsistent, because those who claim the truth can't be known are making a statement about truth.
Right. That's a true statement.
That's the problem. So I'm obviously not saying, I know you're being rhetorical, I'm not defending it. I think it's foolish and nutty. But we're now in a position where truth doesn't matter at all.
See, I think the third aspect of what we were talking about, of that working, that way to analyze Christian reliability, and you can transfer it over to truth, experientially relevant. I think people start waking up when their theories kick them in the nuts. I mean, you understand? I mean, so it's like, be careful the world you help create, because someday you may have to live in it kind of mindset. I mean, so they're saying there's this post that truth is subjective versus objective. Objective, my definition, objective means regardless of what you and I think, it applies to both of us. You know, human beings cannot fly. That's a truth statement. It doesn't matter what you feel. I feel like I can fly. Well, then you're going to be, falling for about 30 seconds, depending on how you jump off of, and then you're going to splatter. But you're not flying. And so that's object. So the object, that your car is white. You have a white car or whatever, off-white. So that is an objective claim, unless we start arguing over the definition of white. But that's an objective claim. Now, the claim that I think white is the best color for a car, that's a subjective claim. That's my opinion. That's my truth, right? So that's the example that plays out in my mind when I think about objective versus subjective truth. And it seems like these people, they wade in the arena of subjective truth, and they don't think there's any objective truth,
right? Which is
which is a truth claim in itself. That's an objective claim, that there's no objective truth.
The only time it becomes a matter of total subjectivity is when your faculties are not working correctly, and if someone has a skewed view of reality because of a physiological condition, obviously. But correcting for that, if you have two individuals that have functional minds and everything's firing as it should, they may come away with two totally different interpretations of something, and we might find that those are so inconsistent that they can't both be true. That may happen as well. So I can respect the fact, like for instance, you're a defense attorney. So if you're in a court of law, you've got a prosecutor that may be working with the same fact pattern as you, but may come to a totally different interpretation of the fact pattern. You guys may agree that these are in fact facts, legitimate facts, not opinions, but facts. Okay, X, Y, and Z. But you may come up with a different explanation for those facts.
It happens all the time.
And it does happen all the time. So now what's going on there? That becomes an issue of interpretation. But I think the question becomes, what's the best alignment?
But see, nobody believes this crock of shit mindset when in a real scenario. Again, and I have to give extreme examples because I've had this discussion with somebody, and I said, so give me a female that you love, and I think he mentioned his cousin, his sister, or somebody, maybe his mom. I said, so an individual walks up to them and says, I would like to have sex with you. No means yes. That's my subjective truth, since my truth is, my reality is no is you playing hardball and you really mean yes, and that's foreplay for me.
Yep.
That's how I'm interpreting. That's my truth. So you go live and so then it turns into a sexual assault situation, and nobody's okay with that. I know it's an extreme example and people might think you're stupid, you're crazy. No, I'm not. I'm trying to make my point to these people that there's objectivity that we have that applies to everybody, whether it's the murder, the spilling of innocent blood. Look what happens, and look at the mind game we play. People, whatever. Well, I mean, I'm not here defending Israel, but when you talk about Israel versus Gaza and Palestine, when you say, will you at least admit that October 7th was heinous? It was horrible. Right. It was murder. It was, they were occupied. So it wasn't, I mean, they in their mind, they rationalize the slaughter of babies and women and rape and murder and all kinds of shit, evil stuff, because that's their truth. I mean, so this is why I say this gets dangerous.
Let's keep going down that road, because that's really important. When things are obvious, they're obvious. I mean, again, getting back to this correspondence view of reality, you look at the world and you have explanation A, and an explanation B is literally the converse of it. They can't possibly be equally true or be true. One of them has to be true, the other one has to be false. But most of us live in that gray area where, getting back to your defense attorney example, or the defense attorney example, you may have an explanation for the facts and there may be another explanation for the facts, but at the end of the day, there is one explanation that best ties the evidence together. And then you end up with what's called a descriptive success in the world of truth philosophy. You accept the challenge and you win the challenge for the day. You do the best job at explaining the facts, and then a jury lines up with you, says, I go with him because what he said provides the best explanation for all of the facts, whereas the prosecution did a great job but leaves out this one thing that doesn't quite come together. And so I think that courtroom example is really sort of where the world is when it comes to talk about worldview, or Christianity as a religion, or Hinduism or Islam, the competing religions. Every single religion, for the most part, makes claims that are true. Most religions make claims that are true. Like, for instance, both Islam and Christianity.
They're making truth claims and that it's their truth? Or are you saying they're making claims that end up being true?
I think, well, they're making truth claims, and I'm also, yes, but I'm also going to go one step further. I'm going to say on several issues, they make claims that are true. For instance, Islam at the 35,000 foot level aligns with Christianity in the sense that it says there's a God. And Christianity says there's a God. At that level, we're in agreement.
Right.
But Christianity says that God is 3 in 1. But Islam says that's not the case. They're strict monotheists, and Sirah 112.1 or Quran 112.1 says that there's literally one God. They're strict monotheists. They dismiss Trinitarianism. And so now those are two divergent claims. So now we get into...
Well, we're claiming one God too, but 3 in person.
Right.
I just want to make sure someone that
3 in 1.
Right.
That there are 3 personalities. There's one God and 3 that's right.
3 persons and 1 being.
That's exactly right. So one essence, one nature, but 3 beings, if you will. Whereas Islam says there's one nature, there's one essence, there's one being, there's one God, and so forth. We're saying there's a God, there's a Father and a Son and a Holy Spirit, and they're both equally God, co-equally so and co-eternal. And so now we kind of step back and say, oh, okay, how would we defend our claim versus how they defend their claim? And now it gets into fact patterns and what is the best explanation, and for each of the claims, and how does that measure up with reality? How does that measure up with, because Islam's been around since what, 630 AD, and so Christianity's been around a lot longer. And so we've lived a lot of life. There's a lot of claims that have been made. How do we measure those religions? Well, let's look at what those religions have contributed to human society and human culture. Okay, which best reflects what we know God to be, a perfect being, and perfection and love go hand in hand, and a truly loving being. And if you're loving, then that means you are utterly selfless. And so God would not be selfless. Okay, great. Now let's look at what God in the Quran versus God in the Bible, how that God conducts himself towards human beings, and which set of conduct or behavior patterns best line up with what we know about God or what God should be like. And so the point is, we're going back to facts, and then we're measuring the claims based on these various facts. And so facts and truth are always connected. You come up with your own opinion, but you can't make up your own facts. So that matters. And so I think that you're ultimately going to come back to this best explanation. You're going to have good explanations, you're going to have shitty explanations, and you're going to have the best explanations. And our contention is that the Christian worldview, as articulated in the scriptures, Old and New Testament, are the best explanation for all of the evidence about what we know, whether it's scientifically, morally, philosophically, theologically, psychologically. We think it's the best cogent explanation for all of the evidence. And so truth can be measured. That's good. And the postmodern worldview says that not so. Well, the only measurement is how I feel about what is happening.
And what I love about Jesus, there's a lot of things, I love everything about him, but I mean, that he expects us, he doesn't expect us just to say, because I said so. I mean, he gives us evidence. He did miracles. He rose the dead. He raised Lazarus from the dead. He healed many, many people. He was wise. People were just amazed by his wisdom. When John the Baptist was going to he didn't realize he was going to get his head cut off at the time, but when he was in prison, it was his last incarceration, he started having questions. Dare I say he had doubts. And he sent his disciples to Jesus and asked them, was he the one? Or are we waiting for someone else? What an interesting statement. Yeah. For someone who baptized Christ himself, heard the audible voice of God, lived this life eating locusts and not getting married and had probably shitty haircut or hairstyle, but did live this life in preparation as paving the road for Christ, which is fulfilling a prophecy. And then to ask questions in his time of struggle and doubt and need and fear. But Jesus' answer was one of an evidence.
Yes.
Tell John what you have seen and what you have heard. The blind see, the deaf hear, and the lame walk. I mean, what a beautiful response. That he's not saying, hey, tell John to think, just to give me his opinion and to meditate. Tell John just to go to sleep and do some trance meditation or whatever. He said, tell John what you've seen and heard, tell him about the evidence. Tell him about these objective truths that you've seen. And then the Holy Spirit is called the Spirit of Truth. Jesus' character is he's the way, the truth, and the life. That's we talked about. God can't lie. He calls the devil his very weak nemesis. I mean, subservient. But when he's lying, he's the father of lies, and when he's lying, he's speaking his native tongue in Romans 8. I mean, so you have this dichotomy between deception and objective truth.
But your example is a great illustration of this, of how Jesus is practicing. The Bible isn't overt about a theory of truth, but Jesus is practicing the correspondence view of truth. That's what he's saying. He's saying, look, what I said to you, all of those things are faithful. It's faithful to reality. That's why he said, look around. Yeah. Now, I was thinking about a philosopher by the name of Alvin Goldman, and he says, truth is, when you think about truth and what is true and what isn't true, think of it as a horse race. Whether you bet on a horse or what horse you bet on, that's up to you. But in terms of what actually ultimately happens in the race, that's up to the world. That's up to reality, or whatever the eventual reality is. And I think that's exactly right. I mean, we can believe what we want to believe. That's up to us. But ultimately, the world confers either truth or falsity to the things that we're saying. And Jesus was all about that. He says, look, I'm making claims. Now look around. And he was perfectly comfortable with that. I think that's a challenge for his disciples. Are we able to make a case by pointing to the world? And we're tasked with some challenges here, because we can be asked a question about anything at any given time. And so I think that this gets back to whether we're prepared or equipped or studied up.
He overtly and exclusively ties truth to himself. Can you pull up John 8? Is it John 8:31 or 32? That if you're truly my disciple, yeah, it's okay. If you're truly my disciple, that you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So if you're truly one of my students, then you will know the truth, because the exclusive truth comes from me. And this exclusive truth, there's some experiential relevance to it, right? It will set you free. Free from what? From your sin pattern, from your flesh, from the bondage of rejecting God and putting yourself in some type of a shithole of prison, because you're addicted to your flesh pattern. It will set you free from the world lying to you. I mean, in modern examples, when you talk about more than two genders, which is insane, and people started falling for it, whether they believed it or not, I don't know, whether it was out of weakness or out of ignorance or out of, I don't know what the rest of the other one is, but people started believing that, and then we'll get to in a sec. The next one will be John 18:38, I think, and Jesus makes another claim to Pilate before he's crucified. I mean, he says they're talking about his kingdom, and I'll read the passage here in a second. But he said that, I've come to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's making these bold claims that he is the arbiter of truth. And when you think of truth, you go to him.
Well, we should go.
Oh, which one?
We should go and read the passage that you had suggested. I think that, well, you already mentioned John 14:6, but we ought to go back to John 8, John 8:31 to 32. In 14:6 is on the way, the truth and life, no man comes to the Father but by me.
Can we start with 31, just because of the paragraph break? Sorry, I got you right here. Here you go. I'm pulling it up.
Okay, that's fine. John 8:31 to 32.
I can't see it from my man. You got it, George? Or
I have it in front of me. Yep.
So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed in him, "If you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." They answered him, "We are the offspring of Abraham and have never been enslaved to anyone. How is it that you say you will become free?"
Yeah, so I love that he says, you said abide my word. Other translations say, if you hold to my teaching.
Yeah.
If you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. He doesn't start with, if you believe what I say to you, you're my disciples. He says, if you hold to my teaching, you're truly my disciples. And then he continues to say, then you will know the truth. I love that he's making connection between doing what he says and then learning what is true as a result. Why? Because doing what he says has outcomes, and it verifies the truth or falsity of what he teaches ultimately. And he applies that in reverse. Like, how do I know you're a legit disciple or not? I mean, we've talked about Matthew 7:21 to 23. And he says, these people act like they're real disciples, but they're really not. They don't really believe what I say. They don't put what I say into practice. And therefore, they're not really my disciples. If they did put it into practice, it's interesting. They would know the truth, because there's something powerful about obeying the living God that's transformative, and that builds faith. That it does. It builds discipleship. And so I love it. I love that he distills it down to that, because obedience is kind of a lost word today. It's how you feel. Everything's about how you feel. Everything's about good intentions today. Obedience is sort of a lost word.
Yeah, and I say this.
Change it because it started with the ESV, so I had to change it. But you're correct. If you obey my teaching, you are my disciples.
Yeah.
Is your microphone on?
Sorry, it's probably not on. Sorry.
No, it is now. But remember, in Acts 11:26, it was the first time that Christians were called Christians. What were they called before that?
People of the way.
People of the way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, that's a loaded term. So Christianity was called the way. What does that even mean? That's loaded with propositions about reality. With the claims that God is making, and I live my life in a way that reflects that I've processed and accepted those claims, and now my life looks a certain way, and people on the outside looking in, and they attach meaning to that. Being faithful to what God teaches, very powerful. And so I love your example about John the Baptist. I think that's a great illustration. It escaped me when you said it, but it really is powerful that he says, look, kind of don't take my word for it.
Yeah.
Look around.
But I love how practical. I mean, he's so gracious. I mean, that's a gracious statement. When you think, I mean, can you imagine if he was arrogant and if he wasn't loving and understanding? If he would have said, "You what? Am I?
Yeah.
What do you think I'm a ventriloquist? Whose voice did you think you heard when I allowed you to baptize me?" I mean, think about but and in all the years, and John was a contemporary of Jesus. I mean, so he heard and saw the miracles. He saw the teaching. He saw the wisdom. He knew what his mission was, John the Baptist, for the baptizer, to pave the way for Jesus. But even in his time, and what a gracious response Jesus did. I want to make sure I read.
Go ahead.
John 18, because it's critical. So I'm going to start from 35. I mean, you can pull it if you want to, Jeff, but I'm going to.
Yeah, sorry. Let me pull it up. 35.
Okay, I'm just going to read. So he says, "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied, "Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you have done?" Jesus said, 36. "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." "You are a king then," said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth," not a truth, the truth. "Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." Here's a fascinating response by Pilate, which is the world's response. He goes, "What is truth?"
Veritas.
And then he walks away.
Philosopher Francis Bacon makes a quip about that. He says, "Yeah, Pilate asked what is truth, but didn't stick around to find out the answer."
No, he didn't want to find the answer.
But I think that's right, and
That's
I think that's very depictive of where we are today. I was trying to remember whether it was 2014 or 2016. Pew Research Center did a survey, and go ahead.
No, I don't want to. I'm sorry, George. I just want to make sure because there's a consequence.
You're pregnant with something important.
Well, there's a consequence to not following objective truth. Because if we continue past 38, first of all, Pilate says, "What is truth?" Then walks away. So Jesus is making a truth claim, an objective truth claim. He's not saying, "I think my truth is. I think this. This is my opinion." He's saying, everyone on the side of truth, meaning that there's an objective standard, listens to me because I am the truth.
Yes.
Very consistent in John 14.
Totally.
Then he says, "What is truth?" Like, hey, what does it matter? I'm going to go with the flow. And then walks away. With this, he went out again to the Jews gathered there and said this, "I find no basis for a charge against him." So the truth was there's no evidence against him. But when you have that mindset of, what is truth? That's a guy, that's a girl. Penis, vagina, don't compete. Strength, stronger, whatever. Damn, especially in combat sports. But when people say, "What is truth? What does it matter?" There's consequences to that. And there was a consequence to this. There was no truth to support Jesus's conviction, quote unquote, BS conviction. "I find no basis for a charge against him," but he gave in because he was weak and that there was no true definition and he didn't want to stand for that truth. So I just wanted to make that point. That's all.
No, I mean, it's an important point, and that I think society is swimming in that today. I was trying to think, and while you were talking, I don't know how successful I was in figuring it out, but it was either 2014 or 2016. I think it was 2014. Pew Research had done a survey, and in that survey, people were asked, how do they know what is true? Where do they get their information from? And it was a three-way tie among particularly Democrats, people of that political persuasion, particularly very liberal Democrats. It came down to a three-way tie. Public television, CNN, and Jon Stewart's The Daily Show.
Jon
Literally.
Stewart.
Say that one more
He
time.
used to be very popular.
Let's get it back up there.
I think it was 2014. Pew Research Center did a poll and on what people consider the most trusted sources of news, where they got their news, their information. I think it was 2014. And what was interesting is that Democrats in particular basically landed at a three-way tie. Public television in general.
Just
Just public TV.
ABC, NBC.
Yeah, exactly. NPR, particularly, and the major legacy media news channels. So public television, CNN, and Jon Stewart's The Daily Show. And I think about Jon Stewart's a comedian, and he does mock interviews. So and then it was 2014. Now flip forward to 2016, and the Oxford Dictionary got to the end of the year and said the word of the year is post-truth in 2016, and they defined post-truth, and post-truth is it's a set of circumstances in society where objective facts don't matter at all in shaping opinion. It comes down to personal belief or emotion. And that was 2016, the word of the year. And so the more things change, the more they stay the same. I mean, this is really what we're struggling with. It leads to bondage. Because if you are reducing everything to how you feel in the moment, and your feelings are constantly changing, that is a terrible way to live life. It makes you an unpredictable SOB. And we just can't build a society that way. And so Jesus' remedy actually works in the opposite direction. He says, look, there actually is a reality, and reality is mind independent. It really doesn't matter how you feel about it. You got to get back to objective reality, and let it change you. Jesus came, he was someone, he had a particular job description, and that someone is that he was God, and he offered a way back to the Father, and he offered a prescription for doing so, which was really to stand in the gap between a decrepitly sinful humanity and a perfect and holy God that loved them. He became that bridge. He paid the price. He did it himself, and he did it in history, so it becomes inarguable. And so we ought to be able to gather around those facts, and it really shouldn't be about how we feel or don't feel about it. You know what I'm saying? And so I think, how have we built Western civilization? How have we built anything as a human society? And it sure as hell hasn't been because of how we just feel about it.
Yeah, and I want to circle back. You're right. I mean, I want to circle back to kind of the question we posed, I guess, to start this podcast, I guess, in the advertisement was, relativism, fake news, and how Christians should uphold absolute truth in a skeptical world. So how should the Christian respond? See, the Christian should slice through the bullshit. I mean, this is what you and I have been advocating for a long time. When society overreacts and wants to jump through hoops and wants to be a lapdog for whoever's pulling the strings out there, the Christian, or at least the church in whole, should pause and say, well, truth is transcendent, real, universal, and exclusive. Universal meaning 1 + 1 is 2 all over the world. It's exclusive. It's not anything else but 2. Right? It's real. You can rely on, if you have $1 and another dollar, it's $2, that's real. We believe as the Christian that truth comes transcendent, because we just read the scriptures. John 18, John 8, John 14:6. The Holy Spirit is called the Spirit of truth. God, he hates lying, so that's because he's the standard bearer of truth. So he can't contradict himself if he's going to be God. So when we look at all that, the Christian should pause, whatever the issue was, whether it was COVID. Instead of shutting down your church, you just pause and ask questions. Now, if there's a real threat, the Christian's not going to be an obstructionist just for the sake of being an obstructionist. But the Christian should be on the fence post, so to speak, guarding truth, because that's God's character, whatever it is. The truth will set you free from what? From all the control we've seen. There's a practical application to what Jesus was talking about. And so whether it was that, whether it was shots, whether it was BLM Incorporated, whether it was institutional racism, whatever the narrative was that the world wanted to push out there, the Christian pauses, and with 2 Timothy 1:7 courage, of no timidity, with Ephesians 4:15, the spirit of speaking the truth, again in love though, not just to win an argument, not to be right, not to be condescending, not to be hurtful. And if the truth hurts you, that's fine, but that's not my intent. Jesus spoke boldly with people. And he wasn't trying to hurt them, but he wasn't trying not to hurt them. That's what truth does. And that's why we say that the gospel is offensive, because everybody at some point is going to be offended, because the truth will get everybody at some point, because last time I checked, there's one person that walked perfect on this earth, and it wasn't me. It wasn't you. It wasn't anybody that I've seen on this earth. So that's what truth does. It pushes your button, so to speak. So the Christian should even if it's not a theological issue, the very nature of God is to pursue, as you know, I like to say, the Christian should be a truth scavenger because truth matters to God. No deception, no lies. A half-truth is a lie in a sense because you're not presenting all the facts to somebody. Yeah. And so that is the mindset of the Christian, to look for, not wait for truth to come to us, because then you're going to get someone else's opinion on truth and relative truth and subjective truth and all the other bullshit. But we should be looking for truth. And then once we find it, we adjust to it and we change to it and then we champion it. And I bring up Doubting Thomas as my example. Here's Thomas, and I'll leave it on this note to you, George. Here's Thomas, who walked with Christ, who was a disciple, who saw the things scattered like the rest of them. Wasn't with Peter in the courtyard though. I mean, Peter gets his balls busted all the time, but I mean, Peter always fell forward, right? In the boat, he was out on the water. and yes, he denied Jesus 3 times, but he was the only dude there. So I get it. We bust Peter's chops, but he always fell forward. But here's Thomas, who was a skeptic. He wasn't a cynic.